Working now? Yes, okay. So Matti Suominen couldn't join us today, so Anne-Marie, who we saw earlier this morning from the Swedish Internet Foundation, has very nicely offered to join in his place. And this session we're going to be talking about, hopefully an educational session where we'll talk about how to encourage root to branch change within an organization. So we're talking not just about technology stacks, but about individuals within the organization understanding their obligations and making those changes to create a culture of strong data ethics, privacy, data protection, security within an organization. So I'd like to welcome to the stage our participants for this session. We have Mattias Gotthold. Mattias works for municipality here in Sweden and is on the board of the Data Protection Forum here, hence why he has the purple tie. Thank you for joining us. We also have Caroline, who you all know as the chair of the Data Protection Forum and partner in Cirio. And we have Matteo Davis, who's the head of legal compliance at Sony Mobile. And as previously mentioned, Anne-Marie from the Swedish Internet Foundation. Thank you all very much for joining us today. Unfortunately, Anne, you haven't seen the questions in advance, so I apologize for that. But we do have some talking topics here. As I mentioned earlier in the sanctions panel, I've had a number of organizations contact me recently with regards to revisiting data ethics and privacy and GDPR and compliance issues within the organization to reinvigorate, to get people really involved in it again. And actually, I've had a number of people today at this conference explain that they've seen similar issues within their own organizations. So the first question is really, since this initial burst of activity we had last year, so from January through to May last year, it was crazy. Anybody who was working in this space had no time to eat, no time to sleep, no time to breathe. We were all so busy. And awareness, enthusiasm, largely through to insane email campaigns from remarketing companies. We all knew that GDPR was coming, right? We all had our thousands of emails in our inboxes every single day. But since then, and as we discussed earlier, it seems that there has been a dwindling of a contraction of this market. So do you think that there's, within your individual organizations, and bearing in mind we have public sector, private sector, foundation, and of course an external law firm consultant, so we have a fairly broad view here. And I'm going to ask you each in turn, do you think that within the organizations that you're working with, that you have that culture already? And if not, is it something which you're striving to build within the organization? So we'll start with you.
We start with me. Yeah, I'm a data protection officer for 21 organizations within a municipality. So it differs a bit between the different parts. And I would say the first wave we have had now, up to about now, was fear-driven, that they wanted to comply because of fear of retribution from the DPAs for not compliance. And as all know, fear subsides given time. So we have to give something instead of fear to keep it going. But I would say that it differs very much. Some of my organizations have a good privacy culture, other organizations don't.
And we'll go to Matti next, because we'll go private sector. We'll come back to you in a minute, Caroline.
I mean, I completely agree. I have some shining stars in the organization that, started 8-10 years ago, drove things very hard themselves, helped, spread that throughout the company. But of course, there's still pockets that are isolated, that haven't gotten the message, that we're still trying to bring into. For good or bad, mistakenly or correctly, we think we have a pretty good culture around it. So yeah, I think I've lost maybe the train of thought of the rest of the question, but I think that the basic point is, yeah, we have something. Oh, I guess the other point was, I think there was a little too much. GDPR kind of got a little out of hand, that everyone was coming to my desk in May and April going, what are we doing about the GDPR? I mean, I really had GDPR fatigue. And I think the focus was on the wrong things and trying to scurry around and fix leaking dikes, basically. And I think it's much better to try and kind of build things up. So I think if you can get a healthy balance, I think you're much better off. It's hard to say whether the there's a healthy balance now, but I definitely, there's still a lot of attention on this, and there's still some very large fines being thrown around, and I think there's still quite a bit of concern and focus. So no, I don't think that we are in a position where it's like, no, we need more pressure on us to do better. I think actually we probably need a little breathing room to kind of do it right and do it from the ground up.
Thank you very much. Anne-Marie,
Yes.
how's things working for you guys in the Internet Foundation?
I would lie if I didn't confess that I'm a bit jealous about all the focus that the GDPR got in these areas. Is being working with information security in 30 years. I have never been considered as sexy as you are, working with personal data and privacy. But still, we have been certified with the ISO 27000 Information Security Management System for a very long time, since 2012. And I can say that it's a win-win, working together, legal and information security, to make sure that you have the structured, systematic approach to protecting data, personal data or not. So yeah, I think it's valuable, and we have come a long way. I admire my legal department because they are very on top of things, and we've been working even on the older legislation without the fines. They have been very, very much attention to personal data, because we live in trust business. We live on trust. That's the only reason that we are running the Swedish top-level domain, is that people can trust that we are protecting the information in the best way ever.
And Caroline, you have a very different perspective, because obviously as a DPO, as a partner in a law firm, and also with the work that you do at DP Forum, you have a very broad view of what's happening in the market. So what's your opinion on what's going on currently with regards to this culture?
Yes, I think it was, of course, I think Mikael Hopp said earlier before lunch that we have seen kind of the third wave now. Yes, certainly a fatigue. It was crazy during April and May 2018. And often lots of focus and action on the wrong issue, or perhaps not exactly the correct one. We were trying to say that it's not all about the GDPR. It's data privacy as a whole is a lot wider. It's another issue. And it's not just data privacy even, because we need to do lots of other stuff as well. So it was really all about that. It's good, of course, to get the extra attention, to get the extra resources when needed. But also, it was a bit cumbersome to actually still there in the middle of that storm say that it's not just about the GDPR. So perhaps I would guess that it's good to have a bit of a breathing room and give the organizations, also cut them some slack so that they can actually do some work. But to keep the focus on what really matters, and to try to focus on the internal processes, the procedures, what's actually important in this. This is something that should be done over time, of course. So I don't think that it was just one opportunity with regards to the implementation of the GDPR. We have several opportunities coming again and again, and we just have to catch them and to try to use it in order to bring energy. And that's our job to a large extent, to the data privacy professionals, to bring energy into the organizations to be able to pick up on this.
Fantastic, thank you. So we're very lucky to have 4 people on the stage who have a great culture within their organizations. It's not necessarily the same in all organizations, particularly ones which are lower on the resources. But it's obviously there are challenges, and there were challenges, and we saw all these challenges and still continue to see these challenges on a day-to-day basis. But the challenges that we face are very different depending on the environment you work in. So the challenges you face in the public sector are likely to be very different to the challenges you face within Sony, are likely to be very different to the challenges you face. And obviously as a lawyer, similar for you as well, Caroline. So what would you say the biggest hurdles that you had to face? And I'll go to each of you in turn again. We'll start with Matti.
Well, I would say almost every step along the way has been a hurdle. We can start with my name. My name is Mattias, and it means God's gift. That's what they expected when I came. So I had to start to explain that I was not the gift that was going to solve every hurdle when it comes to GDPR and everything else. So that was the first battle, and after that, the next one started. But if we go to the difficulty as a public sector, and when it comes to GDPR, we have when it comes to the Freedom of Information Act, and that we have to store information in order to be transparent. That creates a lot of confusion, where people think we can't leave something out because of GDPR. So that's one thing that's unique for us. But otherwise, I would say the biggest hurdle is that we are a big organization that within the same organization, we do very different things. I mean, the one organization that does less than 50, now I exaggerate, 50 things, it gets merged with someone else until they do around 50. So the organizations are so big and do so many different things that the management can't have a clear grasp of what the business actually are, that what we are here to do. So
you're in constant flux.
Yes, there is a constant flux, and we are very close to the politicians. Which means that the organization can change just because of that, because every 4 years we get new people that decide we want to do this in another way. So there is a constant organizational flux, and it's constantly different perspectives that are placed first. So it's a very dynamic place.
So you'd like to see some more stability and some more constants, yeah?
Well, that depends. Chaos can be very, very good to promote different perspectives. It's harder to maintain something that's high on the agenda, of course, but always being the second line is easier.
And Caroline, the hurdles you face, and if you could talk about it from the perspective of a lawyer, but also as a DPO.
To some extent, of course, the similar challenges. But I think also, especially on the private sector side, it's easy for a very large organization, and especially, for instance, within the financial services sector that already have lots of operating models and processes that do work. They have cross-functional approvals, etc., hopefully already in place. So for a large organization, there are other kinds of issues. Then for small and medium size, then it was already a huge challenge in trying to understand what does this really entail in practice. Would it be GDPR or other legal requirements? How do you actually get this into our operations in a good way that actually works in practice? And then, of course, the second step would be, great, we have a DPO on board, so now everything is fixed. Well, not exactly. The DPO should check and control. Assist, of course, but someone else have the primary responsibility. And that's a challenge in so many organizations. So these different roles, the responsibility that lies with business, the various departments, the various functions, that they should all start to get used to what this actually entails in practice, and not just say, great, we have a DPO. So that's truly a challenge.
And do you think the DPO should be the core figure in nurturing that culture within the organization? Or do you think that should be to somebody who's not directly related to the process and activities of the controller?
Well, it's of course easy to say that it should be someone close to the business, but sometimes there aren't the resources, and especially there aren't the competence. So I would actually say that if no one else is on board, of course the DPO should reach out, because you can actually do quite a lot with just higher attention and some energy, even though it's actually someone else's responsibility. But you can ask the questions. And by that also try to inject some further engagement in the organization. So my personal opinion is that DPOs really are able to do quite a lot and not just sit down and kind of be the second line in order to monitor and report.
And Matteo, I know that this is an approach which is taken by many private sector organisations, is to have privacy champions throughout the organisation. And we discussed on the phone, you've tried to implement this to a certain extent within Sony Mobile. How do you find that works? Has that been problematic, or has that really helped you to achieve that culture?
Well, I mean, I think it's been quite organic for us. So it's happened over time, and I think it's worked quite well. I guess the only problem is, going through reorganizations, and companies change over time. So those things, people leave, people change roles, et cetera. But I think that that's a really key thing to have, is have individuals out in the business and the different sections that you work with, and try to kind of keep working with them consistently. And I guess that's maybe the 2 points, that's one of the 2 points, is you basically have to educate people. It takes time. You can't build a culture overnight. So there has been a lot of just one-to-one time spent over many, many years that you build a relationship, you educate other people, they go and educate other people, and kind of snowballs from there. So it takes a while to get some critical mass and make it grow. And then I guess the other thing is trying to understand the organization. The big challenge for us that kind of helped us finally click is understanding the organization that you exist in and trying to get the hooks in the right position. I think it was mentioned earlier how you can have the perfect policy, but it's out in space, not connected to anything. The real key is to get it into the right hook so that the engineers have to travel through it. And that took quite a time and quite a bit of trial and error to kind of get it right. And they're still, like I said, trying to get those organizations we're not inputted into as well as we'd like, trying to kind of really force them to kind of hook things into all their processes.
And Anne-Marie, do you have anything to add with regards to hurdles?
Yeah, I think, most of all, this is a matter for the board and the management team. It shouldn't come to a surprise to anyone. We have about 85% of our assets are digital. So if the market and the customers are demanding protection of the data assets or information assets we have, that takes both time and effort. Education is part of it, but not all of it, because it has its value, but some people are not able to reach them with education. As a security manager, I sometimes say there's nothing as good as a real incident. Not anything that I wish for you, but that is when we learn from something really bad happening, which is of course quite unnecessary in a sense, but still that is where we get the most learning, probably. And again, the responsibility is with the information owner, those who are responsible for the information in the day-to-day work. Only thing I can do and DPOs can do is support, coordinate, help, give advice, guidelines, but the information owners are the ones who do the job.
Fantastic. So you mentioned the board and buy-in from the board. I just want to see a quick raise of hands. How many DPOs do we have in the room? Or compliance managers? How many of you would like more resources to do your job? Okay, so we talked about resources when we had the sanctions panel on earlier, and how important it is for the supervisory authorities to have the resources that they need. Under GDPR, DPOs are required by law to have an appropriate level of resources. Do you feel you have the resources you need to be able to do your job to the way in which you would like to do it, or do you think more could be done from this space, from board, from management buying? I know what your answer is.
Well, I would have to cite an earlier panelist that he would like to have every person in the country working for the DPA. I would be satisfied with the same level, but I'm not sure when I would say stop.
Yes, and there could always be more resources, of course. But it's also a matter of being efficient with the resources that you have. So it's easy to say that more resources are needed. But to really be able to do it in a good way, and also as mentioned before, I think it's we shouldn't look upon this challenge as one isolated issue for the organizations, but it's rather something that goes together with so many other critical aspects. Just to mention information security, for instance, to mention one. So in a larger concept, this actually entails not just resources focused on this, but in practice that the wheels of the organization are actually spinning. You get the ducks in a row, I think the expression is, to actually make it work in practice for so many other details than just the GDPR.
And Matteo?
Yeah,
you work for a huge corporation. So.
Yeah, I work for a relatively small part of a huge organization. And I guess the point is, with like any giant organization, complex organization, it's trying to get the funding. So it's not so much, and to be clear, the issue I see that's more important about resources isn't about getting me more people or more manpower. It's trying to get the business to invest in tools or the time to kind of do things, I guess. And especially when it's I mean, the sad reality is time's relatively easy to demand. Not sure you're getting it, but it's when they have to actually make an investment that things rise to the level. And I think that's very challenging to try and kind of say when you're basically saying, well, you're compliant now, but we want to be better than just compliant, or we want to kind of have both belts and suspenders, or we want to try and position ourselves in that spot. That's a hard sell to make to a company that's losing a lot of money at the moment.
But that's what culture is all about. Culture is about going beyond the
exactly.
base.
And I think it's important to have that dialogue,
yeah.
right? I mean, to push the company to do the right thing and at least consider it. I think that's really important. So.
And it's becoming much more important from a reputational and branding perspective, from a trust perspective, the long-term thinking that we're now moving towards, whereas for the past decade or so, it's been quite short-term. And Maria, now I know that you've worked in InfoSec for a long time, so you're probably now thinking, oh God, we've got to go through all this again. I've never had enough money for InfoSec, and now I've got to do privacy and create this culture of awareness within the organization for this, and I don't have enough money for that. Are you finding this to be a problem, or are you finding that there's more?
I never had a problem.
You didn't?
No, I'm a very good saleswoman.
Oh, you're very lucky.
No, I mean, it's time to stop being naive about information security. I mean, a lot of companies are, and they will get caught if they are. Time has come to realize that this is really something that you need to do, and not being reactive, but proactive. Just imagine the number that you have to put in a fine, and you put half of that on resources for improving your information security and your privacy, then you have come a long way. So you need to be more strategic about this and make sure that you don't fall into the trap to trying to save money on this, because it will cost you. And there's a need for radical improvement with both infrastructure and services and more collaboration between information security technicians and legal to make this happen. So I'm in a very luxury position who can say, I have the resources that I ask for, but I don't ask for more than I need. Because then the government and the management they're starting to get suspicious about this and say, hey, you spend a lot of money, what is the outcome for us? So you need to be street smart here.
Well, you very conveniently give me another segue into this culture within organizations and involving everybody. So I give speeches on data ethics dozens of times a year. And one of the things I say frequently is that the janitor often has more access to personal data than the CEO. Because of a lack of collaboration between business units, because of a lack of awareness, a lack of training, and a lack of understanding of obligations and responsibilities, we often find that the people who you expect would have access to the data actually have far less access than the people you wouldn't expect. So one of the things that we try and do to raise awareness is to make sure that everybody, root to branch, which is why we came with the title of this panel, has the relevant training and awareness that they need in order to be able to fit into that compliance or that privacy culture. And as you said there, if we don't have that, then you end up with this disjointed, fragmented attempt, which really doesn't work for anybody. So it's very important in my experience that we do try and make everything as inclusive as possible. And I'm sure you probably all agree with that, and that's how you try and maintain the culture within your organizations, right? So, we talk about being accountable to or having access to the board, being appropriately resourced, making sure that you have awareness within the organization. But ultimately, there needs to be some change management. There needs to be management buy-in to be able to resource that appropriately, whether that be through external tools and resources, or whether that be through personnel and awareness raising and knowledge and career development, et cetera, et cetera. So if moving forward, if you had the option, or if you had one thing that you could change within the work environment that you're in to enhance that culture and make your job easier, what would that be? And I'll go to each of you in turn again. But we'll start with Anne-Marie this time.
Well, the answer to that, in my opinion, is continuous improvements. That is what you do. I mean, think about this as a quality function. You need to have continuous improvement to make sure that you do your best. You cannot be average. You need to do the best you can. In that sense, you need to know what works, what doesn't work, how will I improve that, how will I change that, and don't forget documentation, documentation, and documentation. Because if you have that thread, you can go back and say, okay, I have no clue why we put in this measurement or this security control or whatever, because you will forget. But if you document, you can always say, okay, we did it for a good reason. It turned out not to be that good, so we change again. And that is very important and something that people actually forget, the documentation part of it.
So to remember that it isn't a point-to-point process, it's a living, breathing entity, yeah? That you have to continuously reiterate. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And Matteo?
I mean, for me, I think my dream is to have everyone be a privacy champion. I really want every employee to be engaged and try to think about this and try to figure out how are we going to do this better. I mean, I think we're in a business, we sell phones to end users and trying to gain their trust. The phone can suck a scary amount of data off about the end user. So, I mean, I think it's really important that we do it right. And it is technically complex. So I think it's really requires a lot of different people engaged to understand that complexity and do the best they can. And to be clear, I mean, on the executive level, I don't really want them engaged. I just want them to approve what we're doing. I think sometimes the messaging they send down can really be awful. I mean, our CISO sends out a message on Privacy Day, and it just makes me cringe. I'm like, I think we tried to make up for it by having a privacy fika. But I guess the point is,
So you want sincerity instead of rhetoric.
Exactly. And engagement. I think, and empowerment. I think the other thing is you want to make people feel responsible, and the way you do that is give them power.
I mean, I personally wake up every morning and think, yay, I work in privacy. How many of you in the room do the same? It's a wonderful thing. Caroline?
Yes, if I could ask for one thing, it would really be to have a privacy ambassador also in the management and in the board. That's really a game changer, in my opinion. When I see it, it really means that the organization as a whole start to see and understand privacy issues from a strategic perspective. And that really means that we can change a lot. So then you get what is a cliche, but anyhow, more of a people-centric approach, where they start to see data, understand, focus on also what can we really do that would bring, what really would bring value, and additional value to operations, instead of seeing this only as a cost.
I would argue to go beyond that even. I mean, I talk a lot to companies about having data ethicist roles within the organization or an ethics board so that you have this separation between compliance and doing the right thing. And that in itself, I think, can be a tremendous benefit to the culture within the organization.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Mattias?
So many wise things said. I don't really know what to add. But what I would want is that... what I would want is that managers actually manage privacy as a risk, not because they have to, but because they see the value. And some of our managers do, but not all of them. That's what I would really love if it would happen.
Thank you all very much for your insights. We're out of time, so...
Can you hand me the box, please?
The box. We have a question.
Yeah, that too.
Okay.
I have a message.
You have a message, okay.
But questions first, maybe.
Do we have questions? Anybody? This is your opportunity to get a view from some really cool people. Yes, we have a question. Brave man over there. Well, it's privacy, not a health and safety conference.
All right, so the mic's on. Coming from my name is Erik Stavegren. I come from the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences. A very decentralized organization. I usually make a likeness about it's like 100 startups living under a sort of scientific freedom umbrella. So trying to make people follow rules is not very easy. But what I would like to ask is, considering such a sort of free spirit organization, or even a lesser so, what points would you take to the management previously uninterested in privacy issues in order to make them listen, really listen and understand?
That's a tough one. I mean, I first would find another university who is competing with you and have a program in place which you could perhaps sell on as a competitive advantage. I'm not sure how the other panelists would respond to that.
Yeah, I can try. What I would do was would go to the department heads and ask them, how are you doing? And ask, have you done your registers according to Article 30? Have you signed the contracts you have according to Article 28? And summarize that data in a presentation and then show, this is a picture of how our compliance is. And start the discussion from there. Trying to show some hard points where we are compared to where we should be, and take the discussion from there, because management usually responds when they see there is a flaw. If someone just says there is a flaw, they might not listen, but show them it black and white, and they usually listen. That's my experience.
And I could perhaps just add that I think that many times it's about trying to, there are a number of, especially then in a situation like this, so-called low-hanging fruits. So take a couple of them, help them solve in practice what kind of challenges that you have in order to show. And just as an example, I had a discussion not so long ago with another university where we suddenly realized that a huge, actually, database for a huge research project should have been deleted because the information was retained for a far longer period of time. That was an easy one, because if you can actually show that if we do this right, we will, for instance, be able to retain the information. That's one argument that you can use. And several of those kinds of arguments usually could go quite a long way in order to persuade someone into start listening.
Okay.
Can I just, I'm sorry, sounds really, really good and interesting, but you have a 2-minute pitch. And I would threaten with, you will lose your funding if you don't work, more strategic with this.
I think we can applaud that one.